Hello, welcome to Anita the Pedagogue channel. Today we want to do a poetry analysis. The poem we will be looking at is The Weaver Bird, and it is written by Kofi Awoonor. Let's begin. So for the lesson objectives, we will discuss the title, the biography of the poet, the structure of the poem, its analysis, literary devices, the themes, and some likely examination questions. Let's begin with a biography of the poet. Kofi Awoonor was born George Awoonor Williams in Hweta, Ghana, to Ewe parents. He was a poet, literary critic, professor of comparative literature, and served as an ambassador for Ghana. Awoonor earned a BA from University College of Ghana, an MA from University College London, and a PhD in comparative literature from Sunny Stony Brook. Awoonor is an author of the novels This Earth My Brother, which was published in 1971, and Comes the Voyageur at Last, a tale of return to Africa, and this was published in 1992. He died in the Westgate shopping mall attack in Kenya, September 2013. At this point, I would like us to move to the title, The Weaver Bird. Weaver, also called weaver bird, is any of a number of small finch-like birds of the Old World, or any of the several related birds that are noted for their nest-building techniques using grass stems and other plant fibers. The title therefore suggests that this poem is definitely about a weaver bird, and also how the weaver bird is noted for its nest-building techniques. So we are likely to realize that the poem is about the nature of a weaver bird. In this case, it is being compared to something in the real world, and we will get to know that the weaver bird is actually a symbol that represents Europeans in the poem The Weaver Bird. Let's now move on to the poem The Weaver Bird. The weaver bird built in our house and laid its eggs on our only tree. We did not want to send it away. We watched the building of the nest and supervised the egg laying, and the weaver returned in the guise of the owner, preaching salvation to us that owned the house. They say it came from the west, where the storms at sea had felled the gulls, and the fishers dried their nets by lantern light. Its sermon is the definition of ourselves, and our new horizon limits at its nest. But we cannot join the prayers and answers of the communicants. We look for new homes every day. For new altars we strive to rebuild the old shrines defiled by the weaver's excrements. So I want to quickly look at the structure of the poem, and I would like to begin by saying that this poem is a one stanza poem and it has 16 lines. It has 16 lines. Most of the lines are evened, they are not the same. Some lines are longer whilst others are shorter. Again, we want to take note that it is a narrative poem that narrates a story right from the past into the present day. In addition, its diction is simple English language. It has a combination of a use of the simple past tense and simple present tense. So you realize that the weaver bird built in our house, and that is definitely from the past tense. That's from line 1. Line 2, it laid its eggs on our only tree, which is also in the past. Then fast forward, we realize that in the lines 13, we see that we cannot join the prayers and answers of the communicants. Line 14, we look for new homes every day. Line 15, for new altars we strive to rebuild. So these lines are in the present tense and talks about the present day. This poem is a free verse poem. It is not written in a specific pattern and does not have a rhyme scheme. So that is the structure of the poem, The Weaver Bird. So we've looked at the fact that it is a narrative poem and a free verse poem. It has 16 lines, makes use of the simple past tense and the simple present tense. Now we would move on and look at the critical analysis of the poem. We begin with stanza 1, line 1 to 5. So this poem begins with a narration of the history of the speaker, where a weaver bird builds its nest on the only tree of the speaker and his people. He goes on to explain that the weaver bird was welcomed to their territory, in this case, their land, their home, their country. The speaker and his people could have sent the weaver bird away, but we did not send it away because the speaker and his people were very hospitable. So instead of sending the weaver bird away, they played a good host by hosting it and supported the weaver bird to even establish its home, where it eventually laid its eggs. So the weaver bird here represents the colonial masters, Europeans who came to Africa to colonize them. According to the speaker, due to the welcoming nature of Africans, they received the Europeans in a hospitable manner, and in this case we are referring to the weaver bird that was welcomed and allowed them to establish themselves. In establishing themselves, they built castles, they built schools, hospitals, and also introduced religion, Christian religion, for example. So we see that the speaker and his people supervise the egg laying, which in this case is the establishing of some of these organizations by the Europeans. That is the weaver bird. In line 6, the speaker continues to recount the story of the weaver bird, particularly its return, which was in the guise of the owner, that is, pretending to be the owner over the territory where it had been posted and had laid its egg and built its nest. Upon return, the weaver bird also only didn't disguise itself, but it preached salvation. So it talks about the colonial masters coming in their ships and presenting the Bible or the Word of God. The weaver bird took advantage of the hospitality of the hosts, the Africans, and began to claim the territory of it. Africans were traditionalists, that is, per their religion. So, preaching salvation was adulterating their religion, so to say. After the weaver bird felt comfortable, he started claiming ownership of the African lands. The Europeans, who are also known as the people from the West, were suggested by the speaker as the oppressors. Again, lines 9 and 10, where the storms at the sea had felled gulls, and the fishers dried their nets by lantern lights, suggest the speaker is well aware of the endeavors of the Europeans, where they are from, and how they do their things. In line 12, the speaker delves into how the guests have influenced their religion and beliefs. African standards are judged by the taste of Europeans and their standard. Again, the oppression of the hosts, the Africans, is so great that it has eroded the culture and beliefs to conform to that of the Europeans at its nest. Again, the speaker is, however, confident that they will resist the guests by declining to join the prayers and answers of communicants. That is, rejecting the religion that have been imposed, so to say, on Africans. So the speaker in the poem further explains the new state of he and his people who now seek a rediscovery by going back to their roots, breaking away from the influence of the guests, that is the Europeans or the oppressor. In the final line, the speaker laments of how his culture has been negatively eroded or influenced, using the statement, "the old shrines defiled by the weavers' excrement." At this point, we would like to look at literary devices in the poem, and there is the use of anaphora. Anaphora is the repetition of the same word or words at the beginning of successive lines to create a sense of refrain when he uses we and twice in a row to start lines. So we see that we did not want to send it away. We watched the building of the nest and supervised the egg laying and the weaver. There's also the use of personification and metaphor, and personification is giving life or giving human attributes to inanimate objects, whilst a metaphor is making a direct comparison of two things without using connectives like as, than, or resembles. So now let's come to the personification. It is preaching of salvation. The weaver bird has been given a human attribute, that is to preach. Again, there's a use of a metaphor. The coming of the weaver bird to establish its nest at the house of the speaker and his people is actually being compared to the colonization of Ghana by the Europeans. So this whole poem can be said to be a metaphor, because the poem actually is not about any weaver bird, but rather about colonialism, the colonialism of Ghanaians, of the people of Ghana, where Kofi Awoonor hails. Also, there's been the use of imagery. Imagery deals with the use of language to create mental pictures and sensory impressions for emotional effect and intensity. So the use of defiled by the weaver's excrement gives you an imagery of something unpleasant, and this can be based on your sight. The use of alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words. So we see the weaver bird built in our house, so the sound B, and the fishers dry their nets by lantern light, so the repetition of L in lantern and light. Again, the use of symbolism. Symbolism is when you use one idea to represent another thing. So in this instance, egg symbolizes ideas, culture, and standards of Europe, like the castles, the schools, the hospitals that were established. Weaver bird here symbolizes Western ideas and the colonial masters. Tree symbolizes African people, Africa and its tradition. Our here symbolizes Africans because the speaker makes use of our. Talk about he and his people who are Africans. Old shrine here represent traditional African religion. The weaver's excrement here represent the harm caused by the colonial master. We'll now look at themes, the central idea that we can pick from the poem The Weaver Bird. So colonialism. The effect of colonialism on Africans is highlighted in this poem. The speaker laments how it has destroyed the culture and religion of Africans. He also talks about the fact that Africans looked on for this to happen. We watched the building of the nest and supervised the egg laying. Africans saw the guests, the Europeans coming, and when they were establishing and bringing in the religion and all the education and all other things, they actually did nothing about it. They welcomed them. He laments that through religion, the colonial masters took over the Africans and oppressed them in various ways. Then we have theme of religion. Europeans established churches and preached the gospel when they settled in Africa. This resulted in Africans losing their traditional religion. The Europeans' religion greatly influenced many Africans, including the speaker. Even though he wishes otherwise, he sees it as a negative influence which has caused many Africans to seek to return to their old religion and culture. And we see that in We Strive to Rebuild. Poem's conclusion calls for Africans to return to their former culture and religion. The next thing we will look at is failure to act has consequences. Anytime decisions are not made, it leads to some effects which could be harmful. The Africans looked on for the Europeans to settle into their community and establish their standards. In addition, they did not object until the Europeans had entirely influenced their culture, religion, and socio-economic system. Even though they do not wish to be influenced in such amounts, there is little they can do as European standards measure their everyday life. At this point, we'll go on and look at some likely examination questions. What type of poem is the Weaver Bird? Explain the structure of the poem. Mention and explain any two literary devices used in the poem. Explain one theme of the poem. What role did the Africans play in helping the Weaver Bird achieve its aim? How do the speaker and his people seek to restore their home? Would you say the poem The Weaver Bird is predominantly a metaphor? Explain. We've looked at the title, the structure of the poem, its analysis, some literary devices and themes, and I urge you to like and share this video. I do hope this lesson was useful to you. Put in your comments and questions and I'll respond to you. Until I come your way again, keep learning and be the best version of yourself.